morning, everyone. We'll be presenting our digital engineering framework for systematic verification and validation of off-road autonomous vehicles. This research has been conducted in collaboration with Clemson Viper GS Center, US Army DevCom GBSE, and MathWorks. So let us first start off by understanding the problem. We are trying to address the problem of verification and validation of off-road autonomous vehicles, and as we all know, physical testing can quickly become a challenge. There are constraints on the space, time, cost, and safety associated with the testing that we perform. So how can we kind of trade off those constraints is with the help of digital engineering. So there are two ways in which digital engineering can help us really. One is to associate the problems of design complexity. So in off-road autonomous systems, we can have a number of choices from the platform, the perception modalities, as well as the planning and control algorithms, and it can quickly get confusing as to which choices do we make to come up with the system level objective. In addition to that, if we move from the design phase to the validation phase now, there are complexities associated with the validation in terms of the different test parameters that we have. So there is an explosion of the test parameters, especially considering unstructured environments like off-road environment and off-road conditions. So what we are proposing here as a solution or an approach is to combine the power of digital twins, model-based design, and model-based systems engineering practices to systematically address the design, development, verification, and validation for off-road autonomous vehicles. The key idea that we want to also ensure here is, apart from being very systematic, we also want to be very streamlined in terms of the ease of use. So a lot of what you will see us demonstrating is with a single click of button, you can run a whole host of simulations, and that's the point, to be very simple and efficient to use. And we also want a complete traceability across the entire digital thread, starting from the requirements engineering to design and development and the validation and testing of your system. So let us now look at this framework from a case study. So let us say we have a stakeholder requirement that asks us to devise visual servoing, autonomous emergency braking, cruise control, hill hold assist control, and adaptive light control as our functions in the automated system that we have. We can start off by decomposing this into the perception, planning, and control subsystems. And then if we consider now that we have two variant choices across both perception, planning, and control, we can quickly see that this, combined with the just 4 different times of the day and 4 different weather conditions as our test parameters, quickly blows up into a 128-dimensional test matrix. And we can also quickly get an idea, if we explore this even further with more variants or more test parameters, this number can quickly blow up. So we need a systematic and easy to use way to tackle this, and that's where the power of our framework comes in. So the first part of the framework is the digital twins, wherein we are exploiting the auto-drive ecosystem to come up with vehicle and environment representations. And for the vehicle that you see on the slide currently, we have a custom scriptable rendering pipeline that takes care of the photorealism, and we have hierarchically consistent models that take care of the vehicle dynamics and sensor physics. But if we look at the environment, here is a sample test environment spanning 4 kilometers square with different environmental features for different driving profiles. But we also have the capability of now introducing dynamic variability in terms of the times of the day and weather conditions that are now procedurally generated to take care of the test parameters, so to speak. But these digital twins are not really useful or often questioned in terms of their fidelity or reliability, especially because we are using them now to validate our off-road autonomous systems. So what we did is we collected data from real-world experiments in the real-world environment that you see, and then from real-to-sim calibration, we were able to reconstruct this environment in the simulation. And the primary reason for doing this is to now not just account for the vehicle dynamics, but also the vehicle terrain interactions that go on, which are very complex. And so we have, from multiple runs of the real-world control inputs relayed now to the digital twin, we can see the correlation between the trajectories or the state correlation from multiple such runs, and we have been able to achieve a real-to-sim fidelity of over 97%, which gives us more than 95% confidence in terms of the validations that we are now going to do with these digital twins. So I'll now speak about the second half of the digital engineering framework, which is the systems engineering part, where we start with model-based systems engineering practices, like defining a high-level conceptual design, which formally is called the system architecture. And this is basically like decomposing your ideas into a picture where you can lay out the interfaces and tie the requirements. And these requirements can now be traced from the conceptual idea, that is the system architecture, to the implementation stage as well as validation. And once we have the requirements in place, we can actually go ahead with the system architecture and start implementing the system as a model-based design. So we can start with defining the different subsystems as well as the components, and we can also go ahead and start implementing the different parametric variations that we have, or the design choices that we spoke of earlier. After these four initial steps, three initial steps, we can now do the fourth final step of defining the test cases itself. So this can now iterate across the different variant configurations or the design choices, as well as the different test parameters, that is the time of the day and weather conditions. And after that, we can just, with a single click of a button, automate the test case execution, where what you're seeing on the slide right now is the simulations being spun up automatically, the test cases being evaluated, the data being logged, and the test case being executed gracefully. And these iterations keep on happening until you have exhausted the entire test list. And at the end, you are given a lot of data where you can start looking at the high-level requirement satisfaction criteria, as well as more detailed KPIs for analyzing the different behavioral patterns of the process. And all of this can also be now automatically exported as a test report. So for example, we got a test report over 2000 pages, and the idea is not for a human to sit and read through all of those pages, but this serves as a good way of documenting and as an evidence of how well your system performed under which conditions, and can lead to informed design choices as well as ODD specifications, as we will see. So let us talk a little bit more about the data itself. So there are two phases that we can analyze this data in. One, with a single test case, we can start analyzing the different requirement satisfactions. So the KPIs such as the vehicle odometry or the distance to collision metric there can show us how safely the vehicle came to a stop. In this case, approximately 13 meters ahead of the animal herd. And we can also take a look at the collision count, which in this case is 0, which means that the system level objective of safety is met. We can also start looking at subsystem level KPIs like the detection score, for example, which in this case is both consistent and reliable, and that satisfies the perception level requirement R1. We can also look at the different planning and control actions to ensure that there are no conflicts there, and also look at different rate variables. And in this case, particularly since we had imposed jerk limits on the planning subsystem, we can see that since they are well within the prescribed bounds of 6 meters per second cube, we can see that requirement has also been satisfied. And we can also take a look at different error metrics for both tracking and stabilizing controllers, and that can lead us to validate whether our control level requirements have been satisfied. And this is just a single test case. We can do this for any one of the 128 test cases described earlier. But what we can do more importantly is aggregate the results across the entire test matrix to inform both the design choices and operational design domain specifications, and let's see how we do that. So the variants itself lead us to inform design choices. So the first subsystem, the perception subsystem, we chose 2 different variants, and we can see that while the requirement satisfaction rate for the subsystem level requirement was higher in case of the second variant, and the overall satisfaction rate for all the requirements considered is also higher for the second variant, we can naturally select that as our preferred design choice. For the planning subsystem, we can see that both the variants had equally good V2 validation scores, that is for the subsystem level requirement satisfaction, but the overall requirement satisfaction for the first design variant is much better, and so we can choose that. And for the control subsystem, again we see that the second variant was much better in terms of both the individual subsystem level requirement satisfaction as well as overall requirement satisfaction, and so that naturally leads us to choosing that as our preferred design choice. Coming to the parametric variations that we performed, for the times of the day, we can see that the system didn't perform well during evening or night time frames, and that is naturally the case because we are using visual servoing. We can limit the operational design domain for the system to be morning or afternoon time frames. For the weather conditions, we can see that the system performed equally well across all the different weather conditions with slightly less reliability during snowfall, and so we can specify the ODD for the system to be all weather acceptable with slightly extra caution during snow. And this is now an informed design choice from the data that we got from our validation results, and so it is both backed with the physical grounding that we got from the digital twins, as well as the systematic nature of the choice that we performed using the model-based systems engineering framework. And this can now quickly be extended to other use cases, tasks, and platforms. So on the left is the same use case or case study that we presented right now with the razor doing visual servoing on a dirt road, but you can now also extend it to some other platform, say the Husky, using a completely different perception stack, as well as different planning and control algorithms for a completely different task of auto-goal navigation. And within just a few hours, we could now implement this novel use case with the different platform within the same digital engineering framework. So in summary, we presented how high fidelity digital twins in auto drive can be connected with model-based design and model-based systems engineering workflows in MATLAB, Simulink, and System Composer. We talked about procedural generation of test cases and how they lend to automated orchestration of simulations. And we talked about how all of these things come together as a cohesive framework to enhance verification and validation for off-road autonomy. Going ahead, we are already looking at scaling the deployments in terms of parallelized simulations in high-performance computing clusters. We are also looking at active learning and Bayesian optimization methods to zoom in on edge cases rather than brute forcing across all the test parameters. We are also looking at imbibing in situ algorithm refinement pipelines to ensure that the validation results now optimize your autonomy algorithms to ensure maximum validation coverage. And finally, bridging the virtual and physical testing by putting a physical vehicle in the loop with the digital simulations. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time. You can take a look at some of the other resources we have while we answer the questions. Thank you.
Yeah.